start. Now we're going to talk about Muhammad, and I titled this Muhammad, the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Anyone seen the movie The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly? Yeah, I was raised on that movie. It was interesting. I came home one day, and my 4-year-old son was watching The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and I said, "What are you doing showing him?" I said to my wife, "What are you doing showing him that movie?" And she said, "It's his favorite movie." And I said, "I don't care if it's his favorite. Turn it off. Maybe it's 6 or something. I don't know." But there's a reason I titled this Muhammad, the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, not just because there were some good things and some bad things and some ugly things about Muhammad's life, but I remember growing up watching this movie, there was something that always kind of confused me. I understood why Lee Van Cleef, Angel Eyes in the movie, I understood why he was the bad. That was a bad guy. He'd kill anyone to get money, and there's a scene where he beats a woman to get some information out of her. And, so he was a very bad guy. And I understood why Tuco here was called the Ugly. I mean, especially not just not his appearance, but I mean like his life. If you heard the charges that were read against him when he was about to be hanged and stuff, it was raping all kinds of women and all just horrible stuff. So I understood why he was the ugly. I could never figure out why Clint Eastwood was the good. If you think about what Clint Eastwood did in the movie, he would capture someone like Tuco, turn him in to get the bounty reward, and then right when he's about to be executed, free him and turn him in the next town, collect the bounty again, free him again, turn him in at the next town, collect the bounty again. And so he basically robs the government for a living. That's what Clint Eastwood does. And yet he's the good. And I couldn't figure that out when I was young. And eventually I did figure it out. It's, he's Clint Eastwood. He must be the good, no matter what he does. Regardless of what he does, he's Clint Eastwood's character, and so even if it's Dirty Harry or this, he's got to be the good guy. And that's what you find in the life of Muhammad. If you study the life of Muhammad, you'll find some disturbing stuff. Stuff that when I heard for the first time, I said, someone's making this up. This could not be true. No one would believe in this guy if all of this stuff was true. And later on you find out it is true. And I mean, if I were to sit down, matter of fact, if we were to sit down as a group and kind of write down a top 10 list of the worst things a human being could do, Muhammad probably did about 7 of them. This is some rough stuff. And yet Muslims will not just say, hey, that stuff's okay. They'll say, this is the greatest man in history. He so far surpasses everyone else in all of history. There's just no comparison. And so the answer I find is, no matter what Muhammad does, he must be good, just because he's Muhammad. What, you want Mount Duty? Yeah. Let me see if I get it. And Nabil wanted a book that I carry around that's actually pretty, gives a basic idea of the Muslim view. This is from a 20th century scholar on Islam, Abba Abdul Maududi.
Oh man, you killed that.
I'm not Pakistani, dude. What
you hang out with the white
Maududi,
stuff.
that's how you say it. Following pages. If you want to read some.
Okay.
So he's going to read some excerpts from this book about what the Muslim view of Muhammad is.
Now, before I do, I want to tell you that when you have it ingrained in you from childhood, from the moment you can start understanding what your parents are saying to you, that Muhammad is the best man who ever walked on the face of the earth, that is what you believe. You orientate your reality around that. These are the kinds of statements we read from childhood. He, Muhammad, is entirely different from the people among whom he is born, and with whom he spends his youth and early manhood. He never tells a lie. The whole nation is unanimous in testifying to his truthfulness. Even his worst enemies never accuse him of telling a lie on any occasion whatsoever. He talks politely and never uses obscene and abusive language. He has such a charming personality and winsome manners that he captivates the hearts of all those who come in contact with him. He is the very embodiment of modesty, in the midst of a society which is immodest to the core. Born and bred among a people who regard drunkenness and gambling as virtues, he never touches alcohol and never indulges in gambling. His people are uncouth, uncultured, and unclean. Personified in him is the highest culture and the most refined aesthetic outlook. Surrounded on all sides by heartless people, he himself is a heart overflowing with the milk of human kindness. He helps orphans and widows. He is hospitable to travelers. He harms no one. Instead, he goes all out to suffer hardships for others' sake. Living among those for whom war is bread and butter, he is a lover of peace. His heart melts for people when they take up arms and cut each other's throats. In brief, the towering and radiant personality of this man in the midst of such a corrupt and dark environment may be likened to a beacon light, brightening a pitch-dark night to a diamond, or to a diamond in a heap of dead stones.
By the way, this goes on for pages like this. It goes on the entire book, but there's this 30-page section or so that's just these praises of Muhammad and his character. And it's saying that Muhammad is so great that he towers so high above everyone else that it's just obvious that he must be sent from God. And I actually torture my wife with this book. When I want to annoy her, I'll just start reading from this book, and she knows about the life of Muhammad, so she just can't take it. Let me give you sort of the end, the conclusion of this section. By his forceful personality, he made a permanent impression on the hearts of thousands of his disciples, molded them according to his liking. By his iron will, he prepared the ground for revolution, fashioned its shape and features, and directed the current of events into the channel he desired. Can anyone cite another example of a maker of history of such distinction, another revolutionary of such brilliance and splendor? So this is after discussing the life of Muhammad and all the different ways Muhammad is so vastly superior, that Muhammad is the one who produced Islamic culture and shaped it according to the pattern that he'd been given. And it's high praise.
From childhood on, this is what we're taught, and it's also said in the Quran, chapter 33, verse 21 of the Quran. Certainly you have in the apostle of Allah, Muhammad, an excellent exemplar for him who hopes in Allah and the latter day and remembers Allah much. In other words, Muhammad is the perfect exemplar, according to the Quran, the perfect scripture. So this is what we're told to ascribe to. Now, if I can just drive home this point a little bit, if you ever see Muslims with long beards, the reason why is because Muhammad had a long beard. If you see Muslims shave their mustache while having this long beard, it's because Muhammad said, don't grow mustaches like the Christians, and grow your beards out. And so they follow that. If you see Muslims stepping into a mosque with their right foot, if you see Muslims stepping into a bathroom with their left foot, if you see Muslims washing their right hand first, washing their right nostril first, saying certain prayers as they go into certain rooms, this is all because stories of what Muhammad did during his life.
Some Muslims will actually count squares of toilet paper because Muhammad said you should wipe yourself with a certain number of stones, and well, that's what we use now. And so, I mean, how many squares do we have? That's how Muhammad did it. So,
thanks again, David. So Muslims tend to try to emulate as much of Muhammad's life as they possibly can, and this is a form of piety for them.
So we're actually going to look at the good, the bad, and the ugly. And it's important to keep in mind that there are some good things about Muhammad. In other words, you have Muslims who say he's the greatest person in all of history. And you have some people who say he's the absolute worst person in all of history. There's nothing in his life that you could agree with. And as is so often the case, the truth lies somewhere between the endpoints, the extremes. So there are a couple of good things about Muhammad, and I tried to come up with every single one I could. If you can come up with anything else, please let me know. This is what I've been able to say, where I can say, okay, this is something good.
And a lot of these things come from the early years of Islam, like we said, when Muhammad didn't have a lot of power. Look at this for a moment. He was dedicated to social reform. This is true. At the time, women had very few rights in the Arabic society, and he was able to end female infanticide amongst his people. This was a practice whereby girls ended up costing their family more than they had contributed. And so families would bury their daughters alive when they were born.
Or just toss them out in the desert or some bad stuff.
And so that was pretty bad. Muhammad stood against this, which is good. Muhammad also helped widows and orphans. We can explain this. We didn't mention this in Muhammad's life yet, but we can explain this from the fact that Muhammad was born to a widow. Muhammad's father died a few months before he was born. And so his mother was a widow until she died. at which point he had to live with his grandfather, at which point his grandfather died, at which point he had to live with his uncle. And so Muhammad was going from place to place as an orphan, and he probably saw the injustices that happened towards orphans and widows. And so, or maybe he just had a good heart toward orphans and widows. Whatever. He ended up being very kind to orphans and widows in this reform process. Just one moment. He was dedicated to prayer and fasting. This is true. In a society where alcohol was and gambling was a norm, he was dedicated to prayer and fasting. Again, all the sources we get about Muhammad come filtered through an Islamic lens, so we can only be so sure about these things. But as far as we can be sure, this is true. He was a vigorous monotheist. With virtually any exception, he was dedicated towards monotheism in a very pagan society. He did teach about the truth of biblical prophets. Abraham, Isaac, Ishmael, Moses, Job, Jonah, Jesus, John the Baptist. All these people are named in the Quran. And Muhammad teaches them as people worthy of respect, not just worthy of respect, but virtually sinless.
And it's important to keep in mind that there are issues where Muslims agree with Christians and no one else agrees with us. So Muslims believe in the virgin birth. Not exactly the way we believe in it, but who agrees with us on the virgin birth? Atheists don't, Hindus don't know it. No one agrees with us on the virgin birth, but Muslims do. Muslims believe, according to the Quran, Jesus lived the most miraculous life in history. Generally, people don't agree with us on that, but Muslims do. They believe that Jesus is the Messiah. Not exactly the same meaning as we have, but who agrees with us that Jesus is the anointed one. Muslims do, and it's we're going to see lots of other things later on, but it's important to keep in mind things that we do agree with.
I would add one. I would say that he was also tenacious. When it comes to when Muhammad was being exiled from Mecca, he was told, "We will give you any woman or women you want. We will give you as much money as you want. Just stop preaching Islam." And he said, "No, I have to preach this message." That was courageous. That was tenacious.
How about sincere? We could say sincere.
Sincere is a good thing.
Okay.
At times he showed great mercy. For example, coming back into Mecca with 10,000 soldiers, he could have wiped out everyone. This is the same people who had exiled him years before, the same people that caused the death of his uncle, who had taken him up after he had been orphaned, who had caused the death of his first wife, whom he had remained loyal to, by the way. He married his first wife when he was 25, 15 years before claiming prophethood. And he never married another woman while he was with her. So multiple marriages started happening after that. So there was some really good stuff, we can say, in Muhammad's life. And we can't ignore this as people who might want to be shown the falsehood of Islam. Sir?
This is the view of most Muslims, but I don't think I agree with all of it. Female infanticide. They say that they were killing women still. But this is not true because every one of these people had a mother who she was not.
You didn't say they killed all of them.
No. And what you're right. I think Muslims exaggerate this. Like Muslims would say that it was just this. It was, and you can actually point out a contradiction because if you're talking to a Westernized Muslim, and they'll bring up and they'll say yes, and women were just the girls were slaughtered left and right. There were practically no women. And then you bring up the polygamy issue, and they say, well, Muslims had to marry all these extra women. Well, what are there all these extra women for if they're all being put to death as little girls? So yes, there is exaggeration, but it was a practice, and Muhammad said, hey, that thing that some people do, don't do that. And
hold on, before you go any further, I want to point something out. Our methodological approach is this: we take the Muslim sources, we see what they say, and we go with it. We try to show this is where your sources have problems. This is where granting everything that you would want to believe, you still have issues. We could challenge the sources. I think that most of the ahadith that we have in these books are made up. I think the fact that the Quran is the records of the Quran, I think, are for the most part something that was embellished over the course of 150 to 250 years after Islam. I think most of Islamic history is something that was embellished after that. But I don't use that approach when I go and talk to a Muslim, because that's not going to be helpful at all. Even a scholar I couldn't converse with at that point, because then what information, what basis, common denominator do we have to talk with? So, can't do it. I appreciate audience interaction, but when I'm trying to make a point, let me finish it and then talk. So when we have this degree of information here, and we can say, okay, I will take this book and everything in it that you print out as a Muslim publisher, and I will use this to show you what I think about Islam. That becomes a much stronger case. That becomes one that can become convincing to a Muslim. That, when I was a Muslim, was what affected me, was the stuff that came out of these books. So I'm trying to find a common denominator here. Now, did this stuff happen? I think the records show they do. Are the records trustworthy? We can only go so far.
And my view, just so you know, is like I said, I think that all of these are true to an extent. Muslims exaggerate what any good Muhammad did in pretty much every situation. It's, if Muhammad did one good thing, it becomes the greatest thing in history. But with anyone, I think you can point out some things where I'd say, okay, I agree. Jesus was born of a virgin. I agree with you on that. You agree on that. You believe there's one God in a culture where they believe in tons of gods. If I have to agree with anyone, I agree with you on that issue. To an extent, I agree. We don't have the exact same concept of God, but I agree with you that there is one God and not all these others.
Okay. So you were saying?
Like, in other ones, like, Korean, I mean, in Bezos Bahar, in the Battle of Bahar, he was completely injured and he was predicted by a woman. And he was all in steel armor. And I read that.
Well, I think, okay, but would you disagree with the fact that Muhammad began preaching a message of monotheism to the most pagan cities in all of Arabia?
Well, there was a lot of
Well, I mean, would you disagree with that? Okay, so you might see things a bit differently, but I think the evidence shows...
Now, just to clarify, when we say he was courageous, we don't mean there was never a situation where he was the opposite, or any situation where he gave in. I think Muhammad gave in on all kinds of things, especially to his own desires. What I mean is there are certain situations where it would have been very easy to back down, and he didn't back down. And so I look at that and say, courage is generally considered a virtue if you don't back down from what you believe in, and Muhammad did that on various occasions. So that's about what we mean.
And really the main point we're trying to get across is, if we demonize, like if we take absolutely everything about someone and make it negative, even when there could be some positive there, then we will be seen as very biased and untrustworthy in our assessment. Whereas if we try to be fair and level with the evidence when we're talking with someone, then we'll be seen as someone worth discussing with, worth dialoguing with.
Now there can be this difference also, as Dave just said, that we have to believe that there is one God as Islam says, and we say no.
No, yeah.
Allah is totally different.
Right. Yeah,
And
absolutely.
we cannot accept in any discussion, in any way, that Allah is the same Jehovah. No way.
Right. And we have to have that discussion.
Yeah, in a discussion like that, if a Muslim says, do you believe in the same God? I'd say, depends on exactly what you mean. If you mean one being created the universe, I agree. But according to Islam, God loves no one but Muslims. That's not the God I know.
Not only that,
There's plenty.
very solid information.
Yeah, and in Christianity, we can call God Father. According to the Quran, Allah is a father to no one. In Christianity, we believe in the Trinity. In Islam, not. So very different concepts of God in many ways. And you can get right down to the attributes. In Christianity, God's justice and love are perfect. At the end of time, there's no unpunished sin in Christianity. Either you paid the price yourself or Jesus took the price on the cross. But every sin has been punished. In Islam, Allah can just sweep some sins under the rug at the end of time if He wants to let those go. So His justice is not perfect. So you can get down to just the attributes and very different concepts. But if I were to say what's better, monotheism of some version versus polytheism, where all of the gods are like us but a bit more powerful, I'd have to say Muhammad is closer to the truth in that way, with that one detail.
That is not true.
What's that?
Okay, well, if you want to discuss that, we can hold on. We have like another half hour to cover the bad and the ugly.
And I know you want to get to that stuff. I know you want to get to that. Yeah.
If you have a question or a comment, write it down, and at the end, whatever time left over, let's bring it up.
Yeah, this is a more enthusiastic crowd than normal, so
That's good. I like it. I like it like
too.
that.
We have a
Yeah.
lot to cover.
Okay. Let's try and get through this as quick as possible, and then if we have some time for questions before lunch, or comments or. All right. So now we have the bad.
Actually, let's do this. I got a good one. If you have a question, raise your hand. If you have a comment, wait till the end.
No.
Go ahead.
Okay. So this is part of it. As I mentioned, I listed all the good things I could think of when it comes to Muhammad, and I couldn't think of any more. Nabil may have come up with another. This is a list of the bad things, and I can think of a lot more. I can think of a lot more bad things. But we'll go through this partial list of things I would classify as bad. And you're going to be wondering, well, what's in the ugly category? Well, wait. So robberies, assassinations. This is what you look when you look to some sources. You find robberies, assassinations.
Now, as a Muslim, I would have stopped him right here. I would have said, what are you talking about? I had never heard any of this.
At which point I would open up a book and he would deny the book.
So we'll go with
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So the torture of a man named Kanana, Muhammad's treatment of the Jews, fighting non-Muslims, Muhammad's position on fighting non-Muslims, Muhammad's position on killing people who leave Islam, and some spiritual issues. So we're just going to look at like one or two passages on each one. So this is a passage from the Quran, Surah 2, verse 2:17. They ask thee concerning fighting in the prohibited months. So something about fighting in the prohibited months going on here. Say, fighting therein is a grave offense, but graver still in the sight of God, to prevent access to the path of God, to deny Him, to prevent access to the sacred mosque, and drive out its members. Tumult and oppression are worse than slaughter. Your average Muslim doesn't know the origin of this revelation. These verses have a historical context, something that was going on in history. When Muhammad left Mecca to Medina, he could have lived a perfectly peaceful life in Medina. The Meccans wanted nothing more to do with him. But he started attacking their caravans. He attacked their caravans, and they didn't respond. He attacked again, they didn't respond. He attacked again, they didn't respond. He attacked them again, they didn't respond. Muhammad attacks their caravans 7 times. Fails every time, they don't do anything in response. Finally, Muslims have a successful raid against a small Meccan caravan. They take all the goods, only one problem: it was during the holy month when everyone was always under agreement, there's going to be no fighting. There's going to be no fighting among us. So they go and they killed someone. They killed someone in the process. So the Muslims go back to Medina and tell Muhammad, hey, we got this stuff and we killed a guy. There's this little problem. We are under a truce. And Muhammad doesn't know what to do with it. He waits a while and this verse comes down. Fighting in the holy month is bad. But what they're doing to you by keeping you from taking the pilgrimage to Mecca, that's worse. Tumult and oppression are worse than slaughter.
Actually, if I can, it's just it was sneaky. Muhammad sent him out to this place.
An envelope.
And he didn't tell them what their instructions were. He said, go out to this place, here's an envelope. When you get there, open up the envelope. And so they're there, it's the holy month. They get to that place, they open it up, and it says, wait a minute, this is telling us to attack the caravan, and it's the holy month. But now they can't argue with Muhammad because they're out in the middle of the desert right in front of the caravan, and they got the letter, and they said, well, we have to attack it then. And so that's how this attack happened.
And the end result was this revelation confirmed that it was, yes, It's not a good idea to do this, but what they're doing is worse, and so divide up the spoils.
By the way, all these stories are found from Muslim sources. We're not finding anything from a non-Muslim source.
Yeah, and so this is very interesting situation. If someone's doing something bad to you, it's okay to slaughter if they're doing something bad, because them oppressing you is worse than you slaughtering them, because they're oppressing Muslims. So if you ever, this is part of the idea, and there's much more to it, but this is part of the idea. If you ever wondered, how can Muslims fly planes into buildings? Well, if they believe you're oppressing some Muslims in Muslim lands, you're oppressing them, and that's worse than them slaughtering you. So this ultimately set off, this ultimately led to the Meccans deciding to defend their property, ultimately led to the Battle of Badr, but we'll talk more about that in a later session. Abu Athaq, so this is on the section on, this would be one of Muhammad's assassinations. Some of them are just random people. Some of them are particularly horrifying. A man named Abu Athaq was over 100 years old, according to the Muslim sources, and he wrote this poem about Muhammad. So Muhammad is brought to Medina. People start converting to Islam, going out fighting, and the community becomes divided because people are converting to Islam, and then those Muslims will no longer do certain things with their former family and relatives and so on. And so Abu Athaq writes this poem. Long have I lived, but never have I seen an assembly or collection of people more faithful to their undertaking and their allies when called upon than the sons of Kayla when they assembled. Men who overthrew mountains and never submitted. So he's praising the people. He's praising the people there. But then something happens. A rider, this is Muhammad, a rider who came to them split them in two, saying, permitted, forbidden, of all sorts of things. Had you believed in glory or kingship, you would have followed Tuba. Tuba was an ancient leader. So he says, you'd be better off following someone else other than Muhammad. This poem got circulated. And Muhammad's response was, who's going to kill this man for me? And so they went and stabbed a man who's over 100 years old to death in his sleep, stabbed him through the liver. Right after this, a woman named Asma bint Marwan heard about what happened, and she writes a poem saying, who's going to stand up to this man? Who's going to stand up to Muhammad? Look at what he's doing in our community. And Muhammad says, who's going to kill her? When the Muslim went to kill her, she was in the middle of her 5 children. She was breastfeeding one of them. They had to pull the baby away so they could stab her to death. But Muhammad is having people assassinated just for criticizing him or criticizing Islam. And so the point is, when you go back to these sources, everything happening in the world today kind of makes sense. Why would a Muslim go nuts and start killing people over cartoons or over a book like the Satanic Verses by Salman Rushdie? Why would people die over these things? Go back to the Muslim sources. This was the cartoon of the day. You write a little poem critical of someone and pass it around. And that's what happened. What was Muhammad's orders when this happened? You kill this person, you assassinate them, and that's why people have to die.
And to put that in, since we touched on modern context there for a moment, I want to point out, most Muslims don't know about this at all.
No clue.
They have no idea about Kinana, they have no idea about Abu Athaq or Asma bin Marwan. No idea. And once they find out, there's generally one of two responses. One is to say, oh, I don't believe this. This is poor history, it's poor sources, it has nothing to do with me. This is not the Islam I know, therefore it can't be true. They'll deny it. That's the average response in the West. So Western Muslims you run into, that's what you'll get. In certain areas which are much, much more fundamentalist, you'll have the response saying, oh, that's what Muhammad wanted me to do? Well then, I need to become more like that. I need to become more willing to respond in that way. And that's how you have a radicalizing of certain Muslims. Now, I'd say that response is much, much less common than the other response, but you only need a few people responding like that to wreak havoc.
Here's another one. This would be on torturing a man for money. Now, Muhammad, in Muhammad's defense, he didn't just randomly torture a person for money, but they conquered a town, and there was a man named Kanana who knew where money was hidden. And so Muhammad said, where's the money? And he said, I'm not telling you. And so when Muhammad asked him about the rest and he refused to produce it, so the apostle gave orders to Al-Zubair bin Al-Awam. Thank you, Nabil.
That was horrible.
That was great. Torture him until you extract what he has. Torture him until you extract what he has. So he kindled a fire with flint and steel on his chest. until he was nearly dead. Then the apostle delivered him to Muhammad bin Maslama and he struck off his head in revenge for his brother Mahmud, who had been killed in battle. So this guy knows where money is, torturing him, not to get information to save the military or something like that. This guy knows where money's hidden. Torture him until you get it, and you light the fire on his chest until he tells you something. The Qurayza Jew, all kinds of stuff you can talk about with the Jews. This is the one that normally gets brought up. Basically, when Muhammad went to Medina, there were 3 tribes of Jews. 8 years later, there's no tribe of Jews. Ever wondered what happened? Well, Muhammad kicks out the first 2. The second situation, we're not going to go into it, but the second situation was totally trumped up. But the Qurayza Jews apparently realized, wait a minute, Muhammad is getting rid of us. We didn't convert to Islam like he thought we were. And so now Muhammad isn't a fan of the Jews anymore. And by the way, they were totally right. We'll see later on, Muhammad was telling his followers, I will expel the Jews and Christians from the Arabian Peninsula and will not leave any but Muslims. So Muhammad ultimately wanted one society made of all Muslims. So the third tribe tried to form an alliance with the Meccans, tried to form an alliance against Muhammad with the Meccans. The Meccans didn't help when the Jews were surrounded. And here's what happened. They surrendered, and the apostle confined them in Medina. Then the apostle went out to the market of Medina and dug trenches in it. Then he sent for them and struck off their heads in those trenches as they were brought out to him in batches. There were 600 or 700 in all, though some put the figure as high as 800 or 900. As they were being taken out in batches to the apostle, they asked Ka'b what he thought would be done with him. He replied, well, you never understand. Don't you see that the summoner never stops, and those who are taken away do not return? By Allah, it is death. This went on until the apostle made an end of them. So you walked out. If you were a male, they said drop your pants. If you had reached puberty, you had your head chopped off. If you were anyone else, you were taken into slavery. You become the sex slave of Muslims, or you be sold. And that's why there are no Jews in Medina today. Surah 929 of the Quran. If you want to learn any verse of the Quran, this would be one of them. This would be one of the good ones, 929. This is the one that commands Muslims to fight us because of our beliefs. So it specifically says, fight.
Before you tell me what it says, this is one of the last surahs revealed in the Quran. So this is one of the last divinely inspired messages, according to Muhammad, that he left his community.
Fight those who believe not in Allah nor the last day. So notice, it doesn't say fight those who attack you first. Fight in self-defense. It says fight those who do not believe in something. Fight people because of their beliefs. Nor the last day, nor hold that forbidden which hath been forbidden by Allah and his messenger. So if you don't forbid something that Allah has forbidden through Muhammad, Muslims are commanded to fight you. If you eat pork and Islam condemns pork, Muslims are commanded to fight you. Nor acknowledge the religion of truth. That's Islam. You don't acknowledge Islam as the religion of truth. From among the people of the book. That's the key. That's Jews and Christians. Not talking about the pagans here. Not talking about atheists. Talking about Jews and Christians. From among the people of the book until they pay the jizya with willing submission and feel themselves subdued. The jizya is a tax you pay. If you were a Christian or a Jew, you had the right to pay money to the Muslims, and they would allow you to continue being a Christian or a Jew and not kill you. If you're a pagan, you had 2 options, convert or die. If you're a Christian, you had 3 options, convert or pay this tax or die. But the key point is, this is based on your beliefs. And if any Muslim ever doubts that, just read the next verse. It specifically says, the Christians say Jesus is the Son of God. The Christians say Jesus is the Son of Allah. And then calls on Allah to fight us. How? Through the Muslims fighting us. So, interesting stuff, and helps shed light on what goes on in the world today. So in Pakistan or in Egypt, you wonder why Muslims would go out and fight the unbelievers they're commanded to.
I would like to just briefly point out that I knew some of these verses existed in the Quran while I was still Muslim. It didn't bother me because I was told to interpret them in the historical context. What was the historical context? What I had been taught was that people were attacking Muslims, and Muslims in self-defense were being told, go ahead and fight back. And that doesn't sound so bad, fight back. But actually, when you actually investigate this stuff, that's not the context at all. This was about trying to get money, actually. Chapter 9, verse 28, the verse right before that, indicates that Muslims will worry about where they're going to get money from. And Muhammad responds by saying, don't worry, you can get money through the jizya in the next verse by fighting the Jews and Christians until they get attacked. Specifically the Romans. He was going to go out and fight a Roman army that had just gotten its annual salary by an area known as Tabuk.
All right, so killing of apostates. So when the Rivka Berry thing was going on, almost everyone in the media that I saw was saying that Islam doesn't advocate the killing of apostates. That's just made up. No, that's made up. The idea that Muhammad didn't command this. Muhammad's very clear, and I have tons of these. I've only listed 2. Sahih al-Bukhari, so the most trusted source on Muhammad's teachings. Allah's messenger said, whoever changed his Islamic religion, kill him. I don't see how you could possibly be any clearer than that. In other words, if you want to say, when he says, whoever changes his religion, kill him, he really meant don't kill them, well then maybe when he said don't be a Christian, he really meant be a Christian. I mean, if you're going to say he's that unclear, and when he says something, he means the opposite, then you could do anything you want with Islam. Sunan ibn Majah, 2535, it was narrated from Ibn Abbas that the Messenger of Allah said, whoever changes his religion, execute him. So you have your head chopped off. And there are instances where Ali, the 4th rightly guided caliph, was actually burning apostates, and he had to be corrected. No, it's by beheading. That's how you deal with something. And now just briefly, some spiritual issues. So earlier we talked about Muhammad. He's fasting, he's praying, he's in a cave, and he gets this revelation. And what it was something starts choking him and says, read. Tells him to read. He says, I can't read, and chokes him until Muhammad says, until I thought it was death. He thought he was going to die. Then it tells him again, read. Muhammad says, I can't read. And it chokes him again. And then it tells him again, read. And he says, I can't read. And then it chokes him again. And so ultimately, he gets some verses. He gets some verses of the Quran. Muhammad runs out of there. He believes he's demon-possessed at this point. He tries to...
This is the first time he's ever had an inclination that he's a prophet. He hasn't had that inclination yet. All that's happened is he's encountered a spiritual being that's choked him 3 times and told him to recite something.
And it makes him suicidal.
He thinks he's demon-possessed.
Thinks he's demon-possessed. He tries to hurl himself off a cliff, but this thing that had just choked him keeps him from jumping off the cliff. He runs to his wife, and his wife says, no, you're not possessed, you're a prophet. Yeah. Yeah. And so it's interesting, I bring this up to Muslims, when we, later on, we're going to see that when we talk about women, women are intellectually deficient. They're stupid according to Islam. Say, wait a minute, according to what Muhammad said, women are stupid. Well, you know, right, that your religion is based on Khadijah's interpretation. Muhammad's interpretation was he's demon-possessed. That's his interpretation of his experience. Khadijah wasn't there. She's the one who says, no, that's an angel speaking for God. Yeah?
Is there a verse or a quote where you want to jump out of the cliff?
But we're almost there.
Pardon me?
We're almost there.
Yeah, that's in Bukhari, where he tries to. The stories are a little different in Ibn Ishaq. In Ibn Ishaq, it's our earliest biography. It's the source that Westerners, non-Muslims prefer, just because it's earlier and it's more of a biography where the hadith are just kind of jumbled together under topic. But there, he goes out of the cave and he goes and tries to kill himself. In Sahih al-Bukhari, so a source that most Muslims would consider more reliable, it's altered. He receives this revelation, then doesn't receive anymore, and then becomes suicidal because he's sad that, I guess, this choking stopped. But either way, they agree that Muhammad was suicidal after these things. So Muhammad eventually is convinced that he is...
The import of that is huge. Most Muslims have absolutely no idea of any of this. They'll deny it vehemently until you pick up Sahih Bukhari and just hold it up and say, look at it, right here. It says he tried to throw himself off of mountaintops because he was depressed. He thought that he had been inspired, the inspiration wasn't coming back, so he tried to throw himself off the mountaintop. It's there, it's in the sources. And that really changes the image that most Muslims have of Muhammad, where they think him to be this stalwart man of great virtue and imperturbability. But no, that's not the case at all. He was suicidal.
Especially when you consider the biblical angelic visits. The idea here is, yeah, if an angel showed up, you'd be scared because maybe that angel is showing up for judgment. But you have to wonder. If you're a Muslim and you start finding out about this, you have to wonder, hey, something shows up, chokes you, you think you're going to die, starts ordering you to do things you can't, it makes you depressed and suicidal, you run out of cave screaming that you've encountered a demon, maybe that's not from God. That's just my view. Yeah?
Actually, in the Muslim tradition, as you mentioned, both stories are told. The one that says that he was suicidal after the incident, and the other that says it was after a period of non-sexual relations. And it was not a joke, and he said he was, in a sense, would have been strangled. It was described as a very tight hug. Do we recall him tightly?
Until he thought he was going to die?
Until he thought it was dead. So no hug is tight enough to kill you.
This would be an angel, the archangel Gabriel had come to him and he held him tight. And he told him to read. He said, I'm illiterate, I cannot read. This is what he said, I cannot read. It's illiteracy. And he commands him again to read. Again, he said,
Why is it commanding him to read?
what's that?
I mean, did Gabriel know that he couldn't read?
Of course he knew.
Why would he?
Because this again is part of the proof of who this man was. That he's come to speak the word of God. So, and the last messenger was someone who speaks the word of God. And this is who this individual is. He's come to speak the word of God. And he's someone who doesn't have the ability to read. So therefore, he doesn't gather this information about who God is, or Christianity, Judaism, or any other faith for that matter, through any other source. This had to have been through the divine revelation, because if he's a literal person, how can he have gathered all this information? How can he have put together this religion without having the ability to discover for himself, if not by the intervention of the hand of God?
That's a great question. The fact of the matter is, though, what you have in 7th century Arabia is you have Christianity, you have Judaism, you've got pagan religions, you've got the Sabaeans, you've got Zoroastrians, you've got all kinds of religious traditions. Now, what do? The Sabaeans, for example, pray 5 times a day. You've got Zoroastrians who will come and make homage at Mecca. You've got people who are circling the Kaaba. You've got Jews and Christians who are praying to one God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Moses, Jesus, etc. Muhammad takes this and makes it into his religion. I mean, we see all these elements. So, I mean, your argument just now was, how could a man have taken all these elements and revealed a religion unless it was from God? To me, it looks like he took everything that existed around him, wrapped it up into one, and said, here is a religion.
In other words, if he had come up with something totally unique in every way and no one had ever heard of it, but everything we read about in the Quran seems like it came from someone right around him. It didn't come from someone in China, for instance. It came, in other words, if I were to expect what religion would arise if you have a kind of a mixture of Judaism and Christianity and the Sabaeans and the paganism, and you put it all together and rolled it into a ball, I'd say you get something like Islam.
This right here is taken from the core of Islam. Islam has never ever said it was a new religion. So,
I agree with you on that.
Oh, we're just responding to what you said. You had said, how could he have come up with all this stuff? So I'm just, no, please, no. Please.
It's gonna get chaotic. It's gonna get chaotic.
No audience right now, please.
We're about to go to lunch, so anyone who wants to get together in a circle can have a discussion.
You don't want this to get chaotic. What we were just talking about right now, I think nobody could argue with the factual basis of it. That number one, Ibn Ishaq says when Muhammad was invited Hira, he was praying. A force came to him and squeezed him so tightly he thought he was going to die. That's a virtual quote from Ibn Ishaq. That happened 3 times. He comes out, he says, woe is me, I'm either a poet or a man possessed. He goes to Khadija and he says, I'm either a poet or a man possessed, smother me. She says, no, you are a prophet, just like Gabriel came to Moses, he has come to you. Let's go to my cousin and talk about that. He goes to Waraka bin Nawfal, they talk, Waraka says, yes, you were a prophet. Later, he doesn't, according to Sayyid Bukhari now, he doesn't get any revelations over the next few months, and he decides to go to mountaintops to try to throw himself off At which point a being comes back and says, no, you are a prophet, don't throw yourself off. All I've done just now is quoted Ibn Ishaq in Sahih Bukhari. Do you agree? We're not saying it does. We're not saying that at all. All we're saying is this is stuff that's there that people generally don't deal with.
Any human being, when faced with such a scenario, and places his mind over and over, and he wonders what has happened to him, especially when there's a big gap between the events, even if it's like several days, this is playing in your mind. Eventually, it's going to drive to a state of uncertainty or where you question yourself. So this is why you find him going back to this location, and even if you try to, some say the opinion holds that, like I said, he went to, almost wanted to throw himself off the mountain, and his force again came back to him to prevent him from doing so. So this is part of humanity. This man, when it's all said and done, he's nothing more than a human being.
Yeah, I'd like to clarify our positions. Here's what I'm not saying. I'm not saying, look, Muhammad became suicidal, he's a false prophet. That's not my position. The overall position is going to be, I look at this, and so Muhammad's first impression, whatever happened to him, he was convinced that it's some sort of bad spirit. I look at that and I say, okay, that's something that bothers me. Now, if that were the only problem, and other than that there were all kinds of good evidence for Islam, then I'd say, okay, well, that's not enough to refute Islam. Similarly, Muhammad becomes suicidal. Muhammad delivers the satanic verses. So I have 37 sources talking about this interesting event in which Muhammad apparently was upset that the people of Mecca were not converting, his tribesmen. He cared about them. And he wanted them to convert, and he longed for a revelation that would help them convert. And finally he gets one. It says, have you not heard of Allat, Alus, and Manat, the third, the other? These are the exalted cranes whose intercession is to be hoped for. Now what this means is, these are the crane goddesses. They're the bird goddesses. They can carry your prayers up to Allah, so they can intercede between you and Allah. A little while after that, Muhammad said, sorry, those revelations that I gave you, the devil tricked me into giving those revelations.
Just
Now,
remind you, 37 individual sources from...
Where does it come from? Because as a Muslim, obviously, maybe I'm oblivious to it, but I've never heard these revelations.
And that was
I'll tell you what. We'll cover some information about women in Islam in this presentation, and I'll give you the sources in a little while. We'll actually cover them. If you have a problem with them, we'll let you. I'm not talking about this one. I'm talking about later on.
No, that is Bukhari volume 6, hadith number 4862.
Please, I really appreciate your help, but just to keep things in order, we want to minimize audience-to-audience interaction.
We know you know a lot. We know.
We know you know your stuff, man. You can be up here, but we need to keep things in order.
And back to the point. The point I was making was, you take something like the satanic verses. There's another instance where a Muslim who, looking at this, and at the time the defense, the defense later on was, Muhammad's a human being. This shows that Muhammad was a human being. He can, he can be influenced, but Allah comes back and fixes it. So I could look at that, and yes, if this were the only problem, and everything else had been great, I would look at that and say, okay, this isn't enough. This isn't enough to refute Islam. And then you have the black magic issue. That's over and over again, from Al-Bukhari, where Muhammad starts acting weird for, depending on the source, somewhere between 6 months and 2 years. He starts having delusional thoughts. He starts having thinking that he had. It's multiple times in Bukhari. He starts acting weird. He starts saying that he had sex with his wives when he didn't, and so on. And eventually he kind of snaps out of it. And what he said was, a Jewish magician got a hair from my hairbrush and cast a spell on me. Now, my problem with this, in addition to all the other issues, is this is God's greatest messenger, and a Jew can get a hair from his hairbrush and use it to cast a spell and give him delusional thoughts for, at least 6 months. And here, the Muslim defense again is, this was just to show that Muhammad is a human being. He's not someone that you should worship. Well, there's another conclusion that can be drawn for that, namely, he wasn't really a prophet. And I'll just give you, just for kicks. Someone tried to cast a spell on me once. He was a high priest of Wicca. And he had someone get some threads from my clothes and to cast a spell on me. And, well, he died. I'm not saying God killed him. I don't know what happened. He could have just randomly died. My point is, he didn't, the spell didn't work.
Crazy death, by the way. All of a sudden developed brain cancer and died.
Again, I don't know what happened, but I know his spell didn't work in me. Why? Because greater is he who is in me than he who is in the world. And so when I say, hey, that spell did not work on me, but you're telling me here's God's greatest messenger from the true religion, and you could take him out, get him all weird for at least 6 months, that's a problem. Here again, I would say it's cumulative. It's, do we keep seeing problems, or do we keep seeing problems and nothing but problems, or do we see, here's a problem here, here's a little problem there, but overall, this is an exemplary life.
And you missed the beginning part of the presentation. Just to put this in context, we were talking about the Muslim argument that Muhammad is certainly a prophet because look at his lifestyle, look at how excellent he was, look at his character, look at all the great things he did. So this isn't necessarily an argument against his prophethood, it's a response to the argument for his prophethood based off his moral character. If that's not an argument you'd espouse, then this doesn't relate to that. Say again?
How does such events take away from his moral character? I don't see the relevance of these events to his moral character.
That wasn't character, it's bad things. These are things that would cause us to doubt. So we had various examples under there, slaughtering hundreds of Jews, torturing a man named Kanena. We had various instances under there. Not things that anyone I would look at and say, hey, this refutes Islam. It's, I'm looking at this and saying, okay, what's on this side? We've seen the good. We looked at the things that we would consider good about Muhammad. These are the things that would cause problems and make us think, hey, maybe something's not right here. And we haven't even gotten to some of the real, stuff.
This. For every session from here on out, what we're going to do is we're going to keep it to 50 minutes. We'll leave the last 10 minutes for discussion. That way we can cover everything we want to cover, and then people can jump in and talk about stuff.
What do you want to do with the rest of this? Want to wait till after lunch?
Let's finish it real quick,
Okay, we'll zoom through a couple things.
and then we'll go to lunch.
I'm not saying this, Muhammad.
By the
If
way,
you
we're
ma-
not saying Muhammad's ugly. So if you just walked in, that's not what we're saying.
Yeah, we're relating this to the movie The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and the characters, and this is my favorite character, Tuco. Probably my favorite character from any movie ever.
This has more to do with moral character.
This is moral character, and these are if you want to know some of the things that bother me most about Muhammad, these would be on the list. Muhammad and some things that happened and some revelations he received with regard to female captives. Muhammad on wife beating. Muhammad and Zainab, and Muhammad on sex with prepubescent girls. So we're going to have to zoom through these. Maybe we can talk more about them some later in the day, but we do want to try and get close to schedule. In the Quran, you read various verses like this. Also prohibited, women you're not allowed to have sex with. Also prohibited are women already married. Not allowed to have married women, except, notice this is telling you when you can have sex with a married woman. Also prohibited are women already married, except those whom your right hands possess. In other words, and you have similar verses in other chapters on sex with captives. Notice, you can't have sex with a married woman unless she's your captive. Now, what's that mean? Fortunately, we have the historical background. We know the exact situation where this was revealed. Sunan Abu Dawud, you have these in various hadith. I just think this one's the most clear, but they all tell basically the same story. The Apostle of Allah sent a military expedition to Autas on the occasion of the Battle of Hunain. They met their enemy and fought with them. They defeated them and took them captives. Some of the companions of the Apostle of Allah were reluctant to have intercourse with the female captives in the presence of their husbands who were unbelievers. So sometimes you captured women and the men were dead. This time they captured the men and the women were married and their husbands are there. So notice, these Muslim men were reluctant to have intercourse with the female captives who were married and whose husbands were there. Great, you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't have sex with them. So they bring it to Allah, and they bring it to Muhammad, and so Allah the Exalted sent down the Quranic verse, and all married women are forbidden unto you, except those captives whom your right hands possess. That is to say, they are lawful for them when they complete their waiting period. So once it's seen that the woman is not pregnant, then it's okay to have sex with her, even though she's married, even though her husband's still alive, even though her husband's right there. That's something that bothers me.
When I was wrestling between Islam and Christianity, that to me was the biggest thing, was how in the world can the Quran allow for the raping, it's a rape, of captive women when their husbands are right there. It's just unconscionable.
And just to clarify, there are situations where a population, the men get wiped out in war and there's a bunch of women there. who are left over, and they're going to die if they're left on their own. And maybe it's a sad situation, but maybe it's the best situation if those women go with the men. This isn't that situation. This isn't that situation. These are women. They have husbands. They have people to take care of them. They're captured. The Quran comes, the revelation from the Quran comes down and says, you can have sex with these women all you want. Doesn't matter if they're married. Next, Surah 434 of the Quran, men are in charge of women because Allah hath made the one of them to excel the other. We'll be covering this more in the section on violence, by the way. Men are in charge of women because Allah hath made the one of them to excel the other. So men are in charge of women because Allah has made one of them to excel the other, and because they spend of their property for the support of women. So good women are the obedient, guarding in secret that which Allah hath guarded. As for those from whom ye fear rebellion, admonish them and banish them to beds apart and scourge them. Then if they obey you, seek not a way against them. Lo, Allah is ever high, exalted, great. So you have, most interpreters would say 3 stages here. First you warn, then you banish them to their beds apart. And then, as kind of the last straw, you beat them. Notice the justification for doing it. If you fear rebellion. Not she went out and actually did something. You fear she's done something. You think she might do something in the future. You can handle that. And that's why, according to the hadith, no one is to be asked why he beat his wife. Why? Because the husband obviously had a reason. If he was just worried about something, that's enough. Surah 33:37. It's interesting. Read it alongside of Surah 33:5. And when you said to him to whom Allah had shown favor and to whom you had shown favor, keep your wife to yourself and be careful of your duty to Allah. And you concealed in your soul what Allah would bring to light. And you feared men. This is talking about Muhammad. Muhammad feared men here. And Allah had a greater right that you should fear him. But when Zayd had accomplished his want of her, we gave her to you as a wife, so that there should be no difficulty for the believers. This is the reason for the verse. So that there should be no difficulty for the believers in respect of the wives of their adopted sons when they have accomplished their want of them, and Allah's command shall be performed. So that's all very confusing. What this is talking about is Muhammad had an adopted son named Zayd. It's called Zayd bin Muhammad, Zayd son of Muhammad. Zayd had one of the most beautiful wives in Arabia, a woman named Zainab. One day Muhammad goes to see his adopted son Zayd and sees Zainab almost practically naked. Muhammad then apparently receives some confirmation from Allah that Allah is going to give him this wife, the wife of his own adopted son. He walks away praising Allah. But Muhammad is worried about what's going to happen. He's worried about what people are going to think, so he doesn't let this be known. Zayd finds out that Muhammad was interested or attracted to his wife. He divorces her, and Muhammad marries the divorced wife of his own adopted son. Why? What was the cause of the whole situation? Muhammad saying something after seeing her practically naked. And this led to a chain of events where she gets divorced, she marries Muhammad, and now Muhammad has this wife. Notice, and here's the problem, notice the justification. Why in the world would Muhammad marry the divorced wife of his own adopted son? Why would Allah tell him this is what you're going to do? It gives a reason. We gave her to you as a wife. So this is the justification. This is why this was so important. We gave her to you as a wife so that there should be no difficulty for the believers in respect of the wives of their adopted sons when they have accomplished their want of them, and Allah's command shall be performed. So, Muhammad, the reason I need you to go marry the wife of your own adopted son is so that the other believers will know there's no problem marrying the divorced wives of your own adopted sons. Now, who struggles with that? Why is that in the Quran? Why is it such an important issue that Allah has to give a revelation and command his greatest prophet, you need to do this so that people can really understand, hey, it's okay to marry the divorced wives of your own adopted sons. But there's an even bigger problem with that, namely that adoption gets outlawed in Surah 33. So Allah is giving this revelation, which is so important for people to know that it's okay to marry the divorced wives of their own adopted sons, and then outlaws adoption, in which case there are going to be no adopted sons, and it's not an issue. So it's such an important issue, Allah has to command Muhammad to go out and do this, and then it's not an issue at all because there's no more adoption. These are things we look at and say, something's not right here. Something's not right here. And finally, one more. And just so you know, if there's anything in Islam that concerns me most, it would be this one here. Surah 65:4. It's not clear. We read the commentaries. We know what this means. And as for those of your women who have despaired of menstruation, it's talking about divorce rulings. How long do you have to wait in order to divorce a woman? Because you have to wait to see if she's pregnant. Now, the rule was you waited 1 monthly cycle. So you waited a woman to complete a monthly cycle. Then, if she's not pregnant, she can go. The question arose, Muhammad, what about women who don't have a monthly period for a certain reason? And there were 3 categories. There were women who were too old, there were women who were too young, and there were women who were pregnant. Those are the 3 women who won't have this monthly cycle. And so they're asking Muhammad about how do you divorce these? Because you said to wait for the monthly cycle, but not all people have the monthly cycle, so how do we wait in that case? And Surah 65:4 came down. And as for those of your women who have despaired of menstruation, so they don't have menstruation anymore, they're too old, if you have a doubt, their prescribed time shall be 3 months. And of those who have not yet their courses. Look at any of the main Muslim commentators. Those who do not have their courses yet is girls who have not reached the age of puberty. They haven't yet reached the age to have their monthly cycle. And as for the pregnant women, their prescribed time shall be that they lay down their burden, so they give birth. And whoever is careful of his duty to Allah, he will make easy for him his affair. So if you've ever wondered why Muhammad was, you may have heard, able to have sex with Aisha when she was 9 years old, there's no problem in Islam. The Quran allows that. And so when we turn to the most reliable Muslim sources, and I listed all 3 of their major collections of ahadith here, Sahih al-Bukhari, and he consummated his marriage when she was 9 years old. And I was admitted to his house at the age of 9, and she was taken to his house as a bride when she was 9, and her dolls were with her. Aisha said, he had intercourse with me when I was 9 years old. The reason this bothers me so much is that's still going on in the Muslim world. Yemen, there was a book that came out, I think, last year. I Am Najood, age 10 and divorced. It was a girl who actually put together what happened to her as a 9-year-old when she's given to a man. Her sister objected, Dad, she's not ready. She's not ready to go out and have a guy have sex with her. And her dad said, well, that's what Muhammad did. That's what Muhammad did. So this has become the justification. And in Yemen, where there are reformers trying to make laws saying, no, you can't have sex with a girl until she's 15 or 16 or 17 or 18 or something like that, it's actually the diehard Muslim clerics who are saying, no, you can't do that. To say you can't have sex with a girl until a certain age would be to reject the Quran and reject Muhammad and condemn Muhammad. So, not happening. And so you have this really, really awful situation. And so the idea is you have all of this together, put all of this together. These are the things that really concern me. Now, the question would be, is there evidence so great for Islam that any sort of difficulties we have, all of these things, would be justified and would be clear that Muhammad's a prophet in spite of all these things? We'll be looking at those things in a little while. Is there evidence for the Quran?
If there is evidence for Islam that can outweigh all these problems, Islam can still be true. This doesn't mean that necessarily Islam is so false. You just need evidence for Islam that outweighs all of this.
And to clarify what that means, when I was an atheist, there were all kinds of things about Christianity and the Old Testament and the Bible that bothered me. They concerned me. The resurrection of Jesus, I said, okay, it doesn't matter if all those things bother me. Jesus rose from the dead. Therefore, if anyone in history has God's stamp of approval, it's him. So if I'm going to believe anyone tell me about God, I'm going to believe him, and therefore I have to be a Christian. The question is, to be honest, I find way more stuff in Islam that bothers me than ever bothered me about Christianity when I was an atheist. But the question is, do we have something so amazing that would outweigh all of this? And we'll look at those later, after lunch.
Yeah, and I'd like to ask Little Ivan and Peter if you could come up and take a selection. And Judith Capel, Judith Capel, the Massachusetts